So thank you all for coming out on a beautiful evening when it is actually perfect owling weather out there. I'm a little embarrassed that you're in here and out there owling. These love those still nights like tonight, and it's so beautiful outside. So thank you for sacrificing that to be here this evening to hear me speak. So for those of you that don't know Bob and Lucy Duncan, they're my parents. They live on the other side of the bay. They started birding 2 years before I was born. And so I like to quip that I was birding in utero, as I heard them argue over bird identifications and who get to held the one pair of binoculars they had at the time. So so I was brought up in the culture of this organization long ago. That really was a privilege that I didn't really appreciate till later in life when I started interacting and meeting other people that were interested in nature. I had to get out of high school before that happened. And finally in college started meeting other people and realized I had learned a lot from all my quote aunts and uncles in the Francis and Weston Audubon Society and all the field trips that we've been on. So anyway, it's a great pleasure to come back here tonight and talk to you guys. Quick bio. I went to college in St. Petersburg, Florida, at Eckerd College. I went to University of Florida after that, got my master's and then my PhD in zoology, doing research in Uganda, studying tropical forests and how to restore forests after they've been cut down by way of working with birds and other animals. Spent 10 years doing that work and also did a little bit of work in Meso in South America. And then I took a position at Birmingham Southern College and taught for 20 years while my wife finished medical residency, and then she teaches it. She's a physician at University of Alabama at Birmingham at the hospital there. So when I moved to Alabama, it was going to be a temporary gig. Right? It was not on the bucket list to go and live in Alabama for 20 plus years. And yet we still are in Alabama and enjoying it very much. What I'm going to talk about tonight is a talk that evolved from a request from Birmingham Audubon before it became Alabama Audubon while I was still a professor. And my first book had come out, and I do talk about climate change in that book. And that was about the time that National Audubon Society really started drilling down on their climate change research. And so they asked me to put together a talk about birds and climate change, which I did put together. Spent many days diving deep into the literature on that and then trying to summarize that, which you'll see tonight. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And I will admit that I haven't kept up with the latest in climate change impacts on birds in the last 5 years as much as I would have liked to. There are sprinklings of this more recent work in here, but for everything I've seen, like the baseline is all the same all the way through. So what you're going to hear tonight is really representing what we know about how birds are being impacted by climate change globally, but with a particular focus here in the Southeast and, as you might imagine, a focus on Alabama. So we're going to talk about climate change of birds around the world, communities in Alabama, but you can scratch Alabama and insert Florida there as much as you would like because the ecologies of at least this region of Florida is so similar to much of Alabama as well. And then I'm, of course, going to spend a little bit of time talking about my organization, Alabama Audubon, and what we're doing for bird conservation. The Southeast, I don't know how well people understand this, but the Southeast is getting hammered by climate change already. An economic study came out in the late 2010s looking at regions of the US that were being impacted most by climate change. And it wasn't the desert Southwest with droughts. It wasn't the Northeast. It wasn't anywhere else but right here in the Southeast. Principally because of hurricanes, but also from a bunch of other factors, including hotter temperatures, more heat waves, droughts, wildfire risk, heavier rains, more flooding, and of course, rising sea level. So this is where a lot of climate change is really hitting hard on our local ecologies. Birds, I'm preaching to the choir here about like why birds matter. But it's helpful for the choir to get a reminder every once in a while about like why birds matter. Because when you go back and talk to the civilians in your life that don't understand your passion for birds, it's helpful to have some talking points about why birds really matter on a broader scale. I like to point out things that are called ecosystem services, things that birds and nature do for us for free and improve our quality of life, or actually in some cases make our life possible. Birds do a lot of waste disposal, pest control from weeds by sparrows eating weed seeds to controlling rodent populations, pollination of crops and wild plants, more other areas of the world and less here in the Southeast. Forest regeneration. In many parts of the Southeast and certainly around the world, most trees in the forest have seeds that were dispersed by birds. So without birds, forests start to unravel. Nutrient dispersal, moving nutrients, elements, molecules across the landscape to places that help sustain parts of the ecosystem. All of these things are important. Birds are also literally the canaries in the coal mine. Those of you that are familiar with eBird in the status and trends section of the eBird site are familiar with maps like this that show declining populations in red and increasing populations in blue. The indigo bunting is disappearing from the Southeast slowly. There's still lots of indigo buntings out there, but everywhere you see one of these red circles, there's significantly fewer indigo buntings over the last 10 years based on eBird data. Why is that the case? I don't know. I think it might have something to do with climate change. No one's gone out there and done this work on indigo buntings. But this is literally a canary in the coal mine that something's changing in the environment that's impacting birds and very probably also impacting us. Another reason that birds matter is birding tourism. As you all know, we birders, when we travel to places, we drop coin in those communities. And that helps these communities. It helps send the message that protecting birds is good for the economy. The state of Alabama declared the years of 2023 and 24 as the years of Alabama birding, not the years of Alabama birds, but birding, because the tourism department is interested in getting tourists to come to the state and spend money. And so that's how important it is. If Alabama's promoting bird watching, man, bird watching started to find attention. But birding is also important for other reasons as well. Look around. Would you ever have associated with all these other people in your lives? Probably not. You get to meet people from many different walks of life through birding. It's a great way of building community, and man, we need community building now more than ever before. It's also important for mental health. I think you've probably heard the studies that talk about how when people are exposed to environments where there are birds that are singing, they get reductions in stress hormones. They can last up to like 8 hours. And that's just one of several psychological studies that have come out over the last few years looking at the importance of having birds in our lives on our own psychology. Okay, so I'm a conservation biologist by training. That means that I went into a field of science that's focused on preventing more extinctions. In the past, it's been primarily extinctions of other species, but increasingly, I worry about us. The extinction crisis with birds is very real. On the global level, this graph here shows many different taxa. Birds are the third line from the top. And what you see, this is a percentage bar here. What you see is let's see if this laser pointer works. I don't know if you can see the laser pointer here, but with birds, about 15% of birds are facing extinction this century. 15% of species. Now that isn't they're not going to just go extinct at the year what year are we now? The year 2099, right? It is a process all the way along. We'll be losing species tomorrow and the next day and the next day and so forth. So this is a very real problem that we're facing right now and for the rest of the century if we keep behaving the way that we do on the planet. Hopefully we will improve our behavior. Now, here in the US and Canada, many of you have seen these statistics before. Birds have declined by 30% since 1970. I was roughly born around 1970. So when I was a kid out there with my parents on bird walks, we would see an additional 3 birds for every 7 birds that you see today. That's how much birds have declined. Some species have declined even more than 30% because a few species have actually gone up and a few have lower declines. But this is not a healthy trend. And so organizations like yours and mine and many others are working on reversing that trend. And all that work starts with local work. Now, if you dig deeper into this research, you find that some birds are declining faster than others, and a few have improved. So what you're looking at is a timeline here from left to right, and these zigzaggy lines represent different groups of birds based on their ecologies. Up at the very top, we see a couple success stories. Dabbling ducks and water birds have increased over time because of important national and continent-wide conservation strategies to improve conditions for those species. But down at the very bottom, we've got grassland birds, arid land birds, shorebirds, and eastern forest birds are declining faster than any other groups of birds. Why are birds declining? Well, no surprise, the number one cause for decline of biodiversity around the world is habitat loss and degradation. You see the sequence of that happening right here. This is a satellite shot of just random piece of land in Baldwin County, Alabama. If you ever spend any time in Baldwin County, it's like you go there 3 months later and it looks completely different. And it's been that way for 10 years because of the rapid development. We were over there all the time when I was a kid birding, and I don't recognize the place anymore, honestly. So habitat loss and degradation is the cause number one of bird biodiversity decline, as well as other species. Number two, these guys. I'm not a cat hater. We've got a house cat at home, but cats are killing birds at the rate of about 4,566 birds per minute in the US. Think about how many birds, like on average, have died just since we've been here this evening. Now, think about the fact that most of that mortality happens during the day, and that number is actually higher. But that's the number of birds killed by cats in the US during a year divided by the number of minutes in a year. And it's a staggering number. There are solutions for this. Don't have time to get into that tonight, but that's another important way to work on bird conservation. The third is window collisions. I've got some literature up here about the problem and what the solutions are, but about 2,400 birds per minute are dying from window collisions in the US alone. Windows act like mirrors as they reflect the light from the surroundings around them, and birds fly into that thinking it's open space, and that's the last thing they do. There are solutions for that, and they include putting things on the outside of windows. Don't put things on the inside of windows. Those hawk silhouettes that was popular for a while, you put on the inside of the window, that's for you. That does nothing for the birds. The mirror reflection is on the outside of the window. So there's many solutions for this that can reduce mortality. Our organization does a lot of work with this in cities across Alabama, and it's working. All right, back to climate change here. I already went through this slide, so I just want to reignite those neurons that I just fed with information about climate change. Now I'm going to shift gears and start talking about how climate change is affecting birds. This is a relatively new threat to birds compared to, say, these other ones that I just went through, but it is highly significant. And while we don't have numbers on like how many birds are dying a year from climate change, we don't have those numbers yet. I suspect that those numbers would make what the cat kills and the window kills look small in comparison because of the impacts on birds. Now, I want to put some context here in terms of climate change to kind of underscore what a crazy time we're in the Earth's history today because of climate change. So this is a timeline of Earth's history going back 500 million years. And parts of this are truncated, so the scale kind of shifts on the x-axis here, the timeline. The timeline sort of expands as you get farther to the right. So what I want you to notice on the far left, that red arrow is when birds first evolved, which is roughly about 60 to 100 million years ago. Okay, in that time period, based on fossil record. Modern birds survive all the way from then up till now. Obviously, they have seen a lot. Birds as a taxa have seen a lot of change in their time. Notice in the Pleistocene, which is this fourth block from the left, a period that stretched from about 2.5 million years ago to about 10,000 years ago. Lots of spikes in climate change. Really cold times that lasted for a long period, followed by periods of relatively rapid warming. And then it get cold again, and then it get warm again, but mostly cold during those time periods. What you see in this last panel here, I'm just going to walk up here because the laser's not very strong. What this shows in the last panel is the last 20,000 years. And what you see is the end of the Pleistocene. We come out of the ice ages, and we hit a very stable time period for Earth's climate called the Holocene. And this has been very important for human civilization. This is when we settled down, we started agriculture around the world, and started doing all these cool things that humans do. But notice how stable it's been for like the last 10,000 years. And yet birds they've enjoyed that for sure, but they've also been through a lot. Now let's zoom in on this Holocene section here. So this is going back 800,000 years ago to the present over here. And the Holocene is this little wedge here, the last 10,000 years, so about a tenth of this bar right here. Look at how high average temperatures are estimated to be now compared to the past. That's what that line represents. Now, these are not direct temperature measurements. There was nobody out there with a mercury thermometer measuring things. The mercury thermometer was invented in the 1800s. But this is based on carbon dioxide levels in gas bubbles trapped in ice that is dated back that far. And carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are tightly correlated, positively correlated with the warming of the atmosphere. And so we know that this is a very strong representation of the variation in temperature over that time period. So look at where we are now, much, much higher than any time in the last 800,000 years and beyond. So birds, as well as humans and other species, are having to deal with some of the fastest change in the climate that organisms on the planet have ever experienced. And that's pretty staggering. Okay, so what are the climate change impacts on birds? There are many. We do not have time to get into them all tonight. I'm going to go through these 5 here that are in white. But I do want to, mention that there are others, like diseases are spreading faster and spreading across the planet, especially from the tropical regions, and bird diseases we're talking about here, faster than ever before. Community restructuring, like taking what had been stable, relatively stable bird communities, meaning mixtures of species in a particular landscape, and then just sort of shaking that all up. Some species are out, new species are in, and you wind up having very different bird communities. And it's also, there are impacts expected on speciation rates. Over the long arc of time, typically new species arise as populations split, become isolated from one another, and over long periods of time you get speciation. But we're going through a period where we're kind of interrupting that process, that natural process that would be happening on the planet. We don't have time to get into all these, but we're going to talk about these 5 that are up here at the top. Okay, let's start with warming and heat waves. I've been like a fan of birds as a hobbyist, like many of you. I have been, I've also studied as birds professionally as a zoologist. I learned so much about birds that I did not know. Like, for example, these infrared pictures of birds, right? Birds radiate a lot of heat through their beak. Their beaks are vascularized, and so that because they're not covered with feathers, that's a place to exchange heat with the environment, something that had never occurred to me. Also, their legs. Their legs are glowing here in this imagery because that's another way to dump heat into the environment. Birds can also stay cool by bathing, as you see the cardinal up there. If you ever see birds kind of, especially in the summer, drooping their wings, they're not just like falling asleep on the perch or anything like that. It's a way of dumping heat. They're increasing the surface area of their body that's exposed to the air, and also letting the wind kind of get up under their armpits, if you will, and that helps them dump heat. And then sometimes you'll see birds do what's called gular fluttering, where they'll just sit there and they'll just kind of it looks like they're panting. And that's a way of rapidly exchanging air with the inside, with the outside, and dumping heat as a way of staying cool. So birds have ways of staying cool and coping with the warmer temperatures that we have on the planet now and the warmer temperatures that are coming. However, there are costs to this. If birds have to spend more time staying cool, modifying their behavior to stay cool, that means they're spending less time feeding their young, focusing on reproduction, and on all those things that are important for the species to go along. So there are costs to this as the temperature on the planet rises and birds are spending more time doing this. Some of the effects of higher temperatures on birds include physiologic stress, meaning that they're just like when you and I get overheated in the summer, that's physiologic stress. And sometimes you can get so heated that you can't really mentally focus well, or you might have other health problems. The same things can help. Same things can affect birds. You can get mortality of birds during extreme events, especially nestlings, because they're very vulnerable. They're in a very vulnerable stage of their life. Heat waves also reduce food availability. Insects are also very vulnerable to rising temperatures, in part because of the heat and in part because they dry out, they desiccate. And that causes a reduction in food supply for those birds that eat insects. If plants are physiologically stressed and not able to complete the reproductive cycle, then they're not able to flower as much and produce as much seeds or as higher quality seeds. And that causes reductions in food availability for birds. And of course, as climate change sort of gradually eats away at our ecosystems and causing mortality of plants and then all the cascading effects from there, you wind up having habitat degradation that affects many bird species. Okay. So here's a couple of examples of this. This was a heat wave that hit in the Pacific Northwest in 2021. Sadly, this heat wave was so strong that over 700 people in the U.S. Pacific Northwest and British Columbia died because of this heat wave. And it killed thousands and thousands of nestlings of shorebirds, including Caspian terns here. They basically just baked out there on the open sand where they were nesting. You can also have heat waves affect the oceans. So many oceans in the world that are very important for birds are very cold. Cold water holds more oxygen than warmer water, and the more oxygen in the water means that you support a stronger marine food chain. So that's one of the reasons why the Gulf of Mexico, and the northern Gulf of Mexico in the summer is just kind of like not a lot going on out there compared to, say, if you were off the Northeast Atlantic coast or the Pacific Northwest coast, okay? So when you wind up having an overheating of ocean water and then that water moves into areas that would typically be cold, it can cause the disruption of the food chain and as a consequence, birds can die. And in fact, there's literally, they call it the blob, of hot water that moved off the Pacific Northwest coast caused the death of so many really cool oceanic birds and seabirds. Let's see, what is it? There was, oh yeah, here it is down here. There were about 8,000 dead birds per mile of shoreline in Whittier, Alaska. So this is the kind of impact we're seeing. This is exactly what climate scientists were predicting back in the 1980s. They said, climate's going to warm on the planet. If we keep burning fossil fuels, you're going to get heat waves. You're going to get ocean heat waves. You're going to see all these effects. And here we are now living long enough to see them. Another impact of climate change is droughts. Just like heat waves, droughts are natural occurrences on the planet. The problem is that climate change is bringing droughts that hit harder and hit faster. Here in the southeast, we're not seeing more droughts yet. Hopefully we will not, but we're definitely seeing droughts hit harder, hit faster, and last longer. We're in one right now. I was just watching some posts on Instagram this morning about how ephemeral wetlands that are really important for not just birds, but also breeding amphibians are dried up in the spring, and there's going to be a huge hit in terms of amphibian populations. One of the places where birds have been hit really, really hard with drought is the southwestern and western United States. And there's a couple examples here, some research, really well done research out there to document this. Again, what happens is when there's less water in the landscape, you get fewer plants and less food as a consequence. And that affects the fruit, the insects, the small animals, et cetera, that are there available for birds. And it hits all parts of the bird food chain, from your raptors all the way down to your seed eaters. In the pinyon pine region out west, as a result of droughts in the early 2000s through the teens, the 20-teens, there was a 40 to 80% mortality in pinyon pines in these areas. So that's like, imagine our longleaf pine forests that are just north of here, right? Imagine if like 4 to 8 out of 10 trees just died. How devastating that would be for all the birds that breed up there, like the Bachman sparrows, red-cockaded woodpeckers, pine warblers, things like that. As a consequence, bird numbers, just the sheer volume, the number of birds was down by like basically 3/4, down by 73%, and species to diversity go down by roughly 50%. So these impacts are still there. These are long-term impacts that will take many generations to recover if we give these places a chance to recover. Wildfire risks also go up with climate change, which makes sense. Warmer climate means that water doesn't stay on the landscape as long as it used to in the past. Water, even like the rains that came through today, just this morning, that water is evaporating faster off the landscape than it would have, a decade ago or 5 decades ago, et cetera. And that means that if the fuels on the landscape are more drier than they normally are, which means that when a wildfire comes through, it is going to burn off more fuel, the fire is going to be hotter, and there's going to be more ecological change that is negative than positive. Now, I do want to make it clear, natural fires on the landscape are very important and very good for ecosystems. Our longleaf pine ecosystems to the north of here, and in fact in Alabama, nearly all of the terrestrial ecosystems naturally had fire periodically come through those landscapes. Fire that was generated by lightning and would roll through those landscapes and kind of push back the bully plants that would want to take over, and the sun-loving plants that are not as good at competition would then thrive. That was the natural balance of things, if you will. But in today's world, with things being much hotter and drier than they've been in the past, wildfires are going across the landscape and doing, these are not good fires. These are not like the gentle fires we used to have. They're big raging infernos. They're not just bad for ecosystems, but they're very dangerous for people as well. Lots of impacts on birds, including direct mortality, habitat loss, and smoke inhalation, right? We're finding that the firefighters out west and other areas are having like higher rates of lung cancers and problems because of all the smoke that they've been inhaling. Birds have a continuous, they don't have a tidal respiratory system, in, out, in, out. It's continuously, it's like a cycle, it's like a circle of breathing that never stops. And so they're more exposed to these kinds of contaminants than even we are. That's why they would bring canaries into coal mines, because they would die before the miners would. And when the canary kicks over, it's time to drop your pickaxe and run for the surface. So these are some of the consequences for birds. And there's just some of the examples of places we've seen major impacts from wildfires. Australia, the west coast of the US, El Nino. During El Nino years, the southern plains like Texas and Oklahoma, they're having fires out there now. And here in the southeastern US, I've listed some of the years where we've had big droughts and the fires that come with them. Okay. Is everybody depressed now? You're laughing. But yeah, no, this is hard stuff to hear. We care deeply about each other. We care deeply about these landscapes. We care deeply about the birds. We don't want to see this happen. And when it comes to things like climate change, you're like, what can I do? I'm just me. We'll get to all that in just a few minutes. Let's start with asking the question, are birds going to survive climate change? Let's start with that. So first of all, no secret to you guys that birds have superpowers, right? They travel far, they travel fast. We're learning more and more about how they have these communication networks within a species and across species in an area that is actually in some ways rivaling the communication networks that we have in their complexity and efficiencies. Birds, when you give it a chance, most species, not all, can be prolific breeders. They can bounce back. And that's a good superpower to have in these days. And birds are shapeshifters. You guys, so I'm kind of like playing with the idea here of superpowers. And so if you're not familiar with like science fiction and comic books and stuff like that, shapeshifting is changing your form to adapt to what you need to do. So what are birds doing with shapeshifting? Well, okay, a little bit of ecology here. We're going to go back to Ecology 101 and learn Bergmann's rule. Bergmann's rule is that the colder, the bigger, the warmer, the smaller. This all has to do with how homeotherms, like we have a constant body temperature. How homeotherms, like us and birds, keep a constant body temperature across different environments. And the way that many organisms do this, mammals and birds, is that in warmer environments, birds have smaller body sizes. And because the smaller body radiates heat a lot faster than a larger body. Conversely, at higher latitudes, like closer to the poles, a lot of animals tend to be bigger than their counterparts closer to the equator. Because a bigger body holds heat longer than a smaller body. Okay, so in the cold climates, if you're a big person in a cold climate, you're going to do well and not so well near the equator, and vice versa. If you're a small person, you're going to do better at the equator in terms of dumping heat. And we see this across penguins. We see this across all sorts of different species. Bergmann's rule. Okay. Another rule that's similar is called Allen's rule, which is the colder, the shorter, the warmer, the longer. Okay, so what is this all about? So this is an example of different species of rabbits. So the Arctic hare up here has very, very short ears because the ear is how rabbits can radiate heat. Because you maybe see pictures of the sunlight going through like a jackrabbit's ear and you see all the vasculature in that. Okay, that's how they can dump heat into the environment. And if you're living up in the Arctic, you don't want to have a big old floppy ear there dumping heat. You want to hang on to that heat because it's really cold up there. Conversely, if you're down in the desert Southwest, you want some big old ears to dump a lot of heat as much as possible because it's such a hot climate there. So this is Allen's rule. So it turns out Bergmann's rule and Allen's rule are reshaping body sizes and shapes of birds. And this was the most fascinating stuff that I found when I did this research. Okay, so there's a series of studies out now. This one came out in 2021. Shape-shifting, changing animal morphologies as a result of climate change. What we're seeing is that for long-term studies, where birds have been measured year after year after year and so forth, that we're seeing that in response to a warming climate, many bird species are evolving larger beaks, longer legs. Remember what I showed you before these pictures? This is how you radiate heat. So in a warmer climate, it makes sense to have longer legs and bigger beaks to radiate more heat. They're also getting longer wings and smaller sizes. This is not, the smaller size totally makes sense. That's Bergmann's rule right there, okay? The longer wings is a little bit more complex, and they think it has to do with changing air pressure under warmer conditions. So have you ever been, this happened to my family when we flew out to Seattle one year. We almost got stuck in Las Vegas because it was too hot. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, but they didn't want to fly the plane because it was too hot. And it took me a little while to figure it out, but in hot air is a lower pressure. And so you don't have as much cushion under the wing to cause lift when the plane is trying to take off. The plane can't go fast enough to get enough lift to get a cushion of air underneath the wing. It is expected that the same thing is happening with birds that migrate long distances. In a warmer climate, they need longer wings to make up for the lower pressure in the atmosphere because of the warming temperature. I know that's a lot of science really fast. Just all you have to do is walk away with the they're evolving longer wings, the ones that migrate. Some of them, not all. Yeah. So here's an example of like one of these studies that has found this. There are some high-rise buildings in Chicago. These towers, these not like radio towers, but like high rises. Okay, and a lot of birds hit these towers during migration. And people have been gathering those birds year after year after year and identifying the species, recording them, but also measuring them, measuring wing length and beak length and leg length and so forth. And they have been doing this since 1980, so a data set for 40 years. This nicely illustrates how important long-term databases are because sometimes you don't know how they're going to be valuable a couple of decades down the line, but you just keep measuring things and recording that data and sharing it, and then down the line, suddenly you're able to see patterns that otherwise would have been invisible. So the data set was for 40 years. They had 52 species in the data set with 72,000 birds. I would say that's a good sample size. And what they found is across species, with one exception, birds were getting smaller bodies. So when they weighed the birds over time, the average has been dropping. Birds are getting smaller. And they're getting longer wings, just like we talked about before. And this is just one of many studies that have been finding this. Birds are adapting to climate change. Now, I'm not here to say that hey, everything's going to be okay. Birds are adapting. They're doing their damn best to keep up with things, right? Is this going to be enough? We don't know. We don't know. For some birds, probably. For others, maybe not. But it's good to see that birds are adapting to climate change. I found some Another thing that climate change is affecting is the geographic distributions of birds. That comes as no surprise. Longtime birders in the area can rattle off a list of species that are common now that you wouldn't have seen very commonly 10, 20, or 30, 40 years ago or more. Birds are moving north. They're shifting, in some places they're shifting to higher elevations because those elevations are cooler. Otherwise, they're shifting closer to the poles because those places are cooler. Birds have what are called climate envelopes, a range of temperatures that they like to stay in, that their food likes to stay in. There's various different reasons they like to stay in that range of temperatures. And as that envelope shifts farther and farther north, as the planet warms, birds are shifting along with that. So here are a couple of examples of this. This is from this goes back to the National Audubon Society database here, though I grabbed it off the SouthDakotaBirds.com. But what you're looking at here is the distribution of the wood thrush, the historic distribution of the wood thrush, a bird that will be migrating through here within a month or so. And red represents the breeding distribution, yellow is migration, blue is the overwintering population. Now, where birds spend their time is shaped by temperature, but also rainfall patterns. So it's not just temperatures, but rainfall patterns as well, and weather conditions. And the expectation is that species will shift closer to the poles, and whether it's northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere, or to higher elevations as the climate warms. And in fact, that's what we're finding. Let's see, do you want me to get into this too much? Yeah, I do. This is a little bit complicated, but it's the end message is really fascinating. You can make predictions you can look at where birds are historically and say, okay, that's their climate envelope. And then you can look at models for changing temperatures on the planet, or in this case, North America. And you can say, here's what a wood thrush will need in the year 2050, in the year 2080, in the year 2100, and so forth. That's called climate niche modeling. And you can see shifts in that. And then from that, when you do that across species, you can get estimates in like how the communities of birds will change as some species move north and disappear, and species move in from the south, and you wind up having those shifts. And so this study did that on a massive scale. And what you see here is that during the breeding season, as the red and the warmer colors indicate, there is a decline in the diversity of birds that we expect to see throughout most of the US and much of Canada as a result of this. So the communities of birds that are breeding in North America into the future is expected to go down by a fairly significant numbers of species. This is the non-breeding season, a different story, where our winters are getting more mild, which means that over time, birds that are typically overwintering in the Caribbean and Central and South America are not going to need to go that far to migrate anymore. Because why bother, right? And so, because if you can shorten your migration, you're a lot closer to where you're going to be breeding the next spring, the next summer. And of course, the longer you fly, the more exposed you are to potential things that could cause mortality. So, so this is the model predicts that birds actually diversity in the winter will be actually higher than this. So, for at least bird watching purposes, it'll be that there'll be more species of birds around in the winter than there has been in the past. But at the same time, we're losing species, right? When was the last time anybody saw a snow goose down here on the coast? This winter? Anybody? Hey, back then in the 40s and 50s and stuff, there were geese coming all the way down to the coast. Now, it has something to do with climate change, yes, but also wildlife refuge management farther north. But the illustration here is that birds are not coming as far south as they used to. When I was a kid, there used to be white-throated sparrows all over Fort Pickens and my parents' backyard along the immediate coast. Now, white-throated sparrows are kind of scarce. They used to be big flocks all the time. And if you look at the eBird distribution maps, you see that they are not coming as far south as they used to. Why should they? It's not as cold up north as it used to be in your typical winter. Okay. Back to wood thrushes. This is climate niche modeling for the wood thrush. Red indicates places where it's expected that wood thrush will no longer be suitable habitats based on the climate niche modeling. And this is under the warming scenario of 3 degrees Celsius. We're already over 2 degrees Celsius in warming on the planet. So this is we're getting close to this. Does that mean wood thrushes are going to instantly disappear as soon as we hit that level? No. But that means that their rate of decline is going to speed up, and they're going to have to figure out another way of living on the landscape, or it's going to shift the core distribution northward. Okay. So all of this to say is that the predictive science about what birds will do in a warming climate is being has made those predictions, and the studies looking at birds are matching that. So the predictive models are being validated by today's observations. Here's another one. This was done by the team at including folks at Auburn. Some of you know Jeff Hill, who's an ornithologist at Auburn. Brian Rolick was one of his master's students there. They did an analysis of species diversity of birds between 1966 and 2010 and found that the diversity of birds was shifting northwards. So when you looked at how many species at different zones all along here, like the line that would have been like the number, I'm going to make up a number here because I'd have to look into the paper to find out. But let's say this is the line where you'd have like 45 species breeding in an area. That line is now moved north that far in those years, okay, illustrating that, you know, more evidence that things are shifting northward. Okay, I'm gonna take a little breath here. You see, I'm trying to get through a lot here. Let me just catch some water here. That gives you guys a moment to let your brains relax. You're like, oh my God, how much is this guy gonna try to pour into our heads? Well, keep your seatbelts on because we're still going here. Let's talk about migration and breeding. The expectation is that birds would start migrating earlier to come up here. So from the tropics to start breeding because spring is starting earlier. It's also expected that birds would have a longer breeding season because the warm months in the US and Canada would be a much longer growing season, a much longer warm period that birds could breed in, possibly having multiple broods. That's all else being equal, like, you know, the habitat's still in good quality, et cetera, et cetera. And we've already talked about how that isn't necessarily the case, depending on the species. One of the challenges, though, is that some birds don't pay attention to the weather. They don't get up and look at their apps in the morning and say, yeah, is it time to move north? Nope. They're looking at the stars. They only migrate when the sun is at the right position and the stars are in the right position. And that's their clue to migrate. And it turns out that the birds that do that the most are the ones that are overwintering in far south Central America and especially in South America. Because they're so far away from, say, where we are in Northwest Florida and beyond that they can't detect how warm it is. As compared to, say, the birds that are in Cuba over the winter, or the birds that are in Yucatan over the winter. They can tell that it's a warm spring and it's time to migrate early. They can read the weather. Those weather patterns that are coming, that are sweeping across the US hit these areas as well. So they can pay attention to the weather and say, hey guys, it's time to move, let's go. But these guys down here, they're waiting for the sun to reach a certain angle in the sky before they fly, which means that the birds that are overwintering farther to the south, like the cerulean warbler, Swainson's hawk, eastern kingbird, bobolink, and chimney swift, these birds are being left behind. These guys are tied to environmental cues that aren't working anymore. And when they move north, the party's already started. It would be like somebody coming through the door and say, oh, I heard Scot Duncan's talking tonight. And they walked in right now, right? You know, they at least get a little bit of it, but they're going to miss a lot. There's also the problem of the birds that are migrating north earlier still being out of sync with the forest. You know, there's a whole cascade of events that has to happen. The eastern forests have to flesh out with fresh leaves. Caterpillar eggs have to hatch, and those caterpillars start feeding on those leaves. The caterpillars got to get big enough that there and enough of them that they can feed all these warblers and other birds as they move north. All that has to happen in synchrony for this whole migration thing to work well. And if the forests are all out of sync with when birds are arriving, regardless of where they're coming from, you get these mismatches in what's called phenology, the timing of natural events. Okay, trophic mismatches is another way to think of it. Trophic referring to feeding relationships. So trophic mismatches. Okay. So are birds going to survive climate change? So this is a summary slide, and then we're going to move on to a couple other topics. Are birds going to survive climate change? Well, some will. Some might actually, and some are going to thrive. I mean, with 11,000 species of birds on the planet, you can't generalize about all of them. Some are actually going to thrive. Many will not. Some are going to survive, and others are going to go extinct based on these predictions and what we know about conservation today. Many species are sort of in the balance, meaning like, dude, it can go either way. It kind of depends on what choices I make and you guys make and the rest of humanity makes. Many species are adapting and adjusting to the new climate. And by the way, today's climate is mild compared to what's coming. If you look at those predictive models that have borne out to be true all along, we're headed for some even more severe changes moving forward. The birds that are going to probably do the best are what we call generalists. And those are birds that have, a generalist is that friend of yours that can eat anything, anywhere, anytime, right? The specialist is like those of us that have a very narrow diet. And I see some of you like nudging each other, like, you know who you are, right? I'm one of those. Like, I don't eat red meat. I don't eat chicken. I'll eat some seafoods if they're sustainably harvested. So it's hard to when I go to a party because usually there's not something there for me. So I'm like one of those specialists, right? The birds that have a very broad diet and way of living on the landscape, like say laughing gulls, right? They're going to probably do just fine. But others that are specialists, let's say red-cockaded woodpeckers, they're the ones that are going to be likely in trouble. Similarly, the short distance migrants are probably going to do better than the long distance ones. In other words, the birds that overwinter in the Caribbean or Central America or the Southeast relative to the Northeast, they're probably going to do a lot better than those that migrate all the way down to South America. Other birds, however, are not adapting or adjusting, particularly those specialists and long distance migrants. And these species are the most vulnerable to climate change. And by the way, I've been showing you examples from North America, the Western Hemisphere. There are complementary studies that are showing the same patterns about shape shifting and migration timing and all that sort of stuff that's happening in Europe and Asia and Australia and Southeast Asia and Africa. Okay. Other groups that are particularly vulnerable groups of birds include those that live in the high Arctic and the boreal zone, which is the boreal zone is the big conifer forests like you have up in Canada and parts of the northern U.S. Birds that live in arid environments, dry environments are very vulnerable, and of course wetland species because wetlands drying up, as we talked about earlier. Okay, what do we do about this? Can we do anything? Is it too big? What? I'll say this, there's only one certainty about our future. If we don't fight for birds, yeah, we're gonna lose a lot. If we fight for birds, we'll probably be able to save a lot, okay? But the only certainty is if we give up, it's gonna be bad. So there's every reason to work to save birds, okay? What birds need from us now, we need to ramp up ongoing conservation efforts. So the kinds of conservation efforts we've been doing, we need to keep doing, and we need to do more of it. Those tools work, and they will help birds into this future as the planet keeps changing. On a broader societal level, we need to push for a rapid and orderly transition to clean energy. We've kind of hit a soft patch here right now with the current administration and their policies, but we have made a lot of progress over the last few years. We're going to get back to that, and the sooner we get back to that, the better for birds and us. And on our own personal level, the more we can reduce our carbon footprints, our own personal carbon footprints, and promote green market shifts, buying products that are made from companies that are paying attention to this stuff and want to be a successful company, but not trash the planet at the same time. The more we can support that, and the better for the planet to help those companies thrive. And when we make these kinds of choices in our personal lives, like when we convert our lawns to native wildflower habitats and native grasses and things like that. When we are being careful stewards of the natural environments in our neighborhoods, in our yards, and our local parks, that sets a great example for everybody else that lives in our community, our neighbors, plus the kids that are coming up. And leading by example is one of the most effective ways to get conservation done at the local level and change minds and open minds, because that's really the hardest part, is getting people to understand these things and then getting them to getting people to join us in working for a better future. Okay. I just want to make a shout out that deforestation is also, it's not just all fossil fuels causing climate change. About a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere is caused by deforestation. So not only is deforestation bad for clearing out habitat for birds and other species, it's not all just birds, but it's also really bad for putting all that carbon into the atmosphere. Okay, I need a time check. How are we doing?
8:08.
8:08. How much more time do I have to talk? Be real. That's very generous. Okay. I want to go through a little bit about my organization and what we're doing right across the border in Alabama for birds and conservation. A lot of what we do also has benefits for what happens down here along the coast. Much of the ecology of Northwest Florida is identical to what we have in Lower Alabama. There's lots of opportunities for network and cross-pollination, no pun intended. So a lot of this is very relevant. I will also share that Alabama, many of you know this already, but Alabama is a leader in biodiversity across the U.S. We rank number 4 among all U.S. states in terms of total species, and we rank number 1 among states east of the Mississippi River. The only states ahead of us are California, Texas, and Arizona in that order. And we're going to overtake Arizona by the end of the decade. I wrote a book about that called Southern Wonder, Alabama's Surprising Biodiversity. It came out about a decade ago, and it's an introduction to Alabama's biodiversity, why we have it, and why it matters. These books are for sale tonight, and the money goes right to Alabama Audubon for our conservation programs. The other book that I have up here tonight is Southern Rivers. One of the things I learned in writing Southern Wonder about Alabama is how important aquatic biodiversity is for the Southeast. That means the freshwater ecology, all the critters that live in creeks and streams and rivers. That is what really puts this whole region of the U.S. On the global map for biodiversity. And the book explores the environmental history of the Southeast from the perspective of the river. Thank you. And also our environmental history, as well as how the challenges we face today. We're actually having water crises here in the Southeast. Water crisis is not just something for the desert Southwest, it's problems that we're having right now here in the Southeast. And then the best part of the book is the second half, which looks at all the solutions that are out there where we can have our cake and eat it too. And I'm not trying to sell you like something that's crazy. I was thrilled with the research that I found that what is good for rivers and good for ecosystems is good for people as well, even from an economic standpoint. So a lot of good messaging in this book. I think you'd really enjoy that. I'll have them for sale after the talk. All right. So what is Alabama Audubon doing with bird conservation? Well, remember this graph from several minutes ago talking about decline, the 30% decline of birds in U.S. and Canada. I want to highlight grassland birds, shorebirds, and eastern forest birds. Those are the 3 groups of birds that we work on specifically in Alabama with our programs. We are not working on arid land birds because that's like the western United States. We don't have arid land birds here, except for when they're bigger. Okay. So what about grassland birds? Many of you know this, but there's a region of Alabama. It also goes into Mississippi. It's called the Black Belt Prairie. It's named after the tall grass prairie system and their dark prairie soils that dominated this whole region of Alabama. This is the largest tall grass prairie region in the eastern United States. It was very quickly in the 1800s converted almost entirely to cotton agriculture. We lost the prairies relatively rapidly, except for a few little patches where prairies survived. Today, there are landowners that are converting their lands back to prairie, and this is great for our grassland birds that are declining faster than any other group in North America. And so we're doing work in the Black Belt to promote more prairie restoration, specifically geared towards birds and what grassland birds need. Our team was out there what's today? Thursday? Just Monday and Tuesday doing a bio blitz in the Black Belt, where we had the highest count ever of LeConte sparrows statewide. And Andrew Lydiard, our programs coordinator, detected and photographed several Henslow sparrows. And earlier this winter, we banded a Henslow sparrow, which if you're not into sparrows, you're like, what are these sparrows and stuff? They're a species that's disappearing. And it's thought that they only use Baldwin County, Mobile County, Santa Rosa, Escambia County during the winter through this part. Now we know there's a whole hidden population in the winter using the Black Belt, which means we can start doing conservation for those species up there like we hadn't been able to do before. All right. I want to show this slide real quick. This is predicting changes in bird diversity on the landscape based on that climate niche modeling that I showed you before. This is from the scientists at Brooke Bateman at the National Audubon Society, plus a whole team of other people from around the world. And right here, this jumped out at me. This is the Black Belt region, where you're looking at a change in species number over the next few decades of anywhere from 5 to 41%. Lots of species that are just going to get kicked out of there because it's just too freaking hot. And that's because it's such a hot region of the state. Okay. So what are we doing there? I told you about this. We're promoting bird conservation through prairie restoration. The other thing we're doing is promoting bird ecotourism to the Black Belt. Going to the Black Belt is akin to going to North Texas, Oklahoma, or Kansas because of change in the landscape, because it's very open, lots of cattle agriculture and hay agriculture. And the bird life changes as well. Andrew Lydiard, our programs coordinator, had a prairie falcon there just a couple weeks ago. It's I think the third record in Alabama ever. But regularly over the winter, we get lots of the birds that you find there are not the composition and species of birds that you would find elsewhere in Alabama or Northwest Florida. So it's like a little mini vacation to a part of the Southeast without having to go hundreds and hundreds of miles away. Now, the other thing about the Black Belt is that the Black Belt is also one of the poorest regions in the U.S., or even in this hemisphere, especially from a rural perspective. The counties in the Black Belt have they struggle economically, desperately. And so if we can have more birding tourism going to the Black Belt, that means more dollars are dropped to those communities, which helps lift up those communities, improving the lives of people as well as of birds. It also sends a signal to people that live there, hey, people are coming here to see birds. Maybe I should manage my lands that are more bird friendly than in the past. That will help the community. That is a conservation model that is working around the world. And anybody who's gone to Central or South America in the last decade or two to see some of the places where birds have been conserved, and there's birding lodges and things like that, that is exactly that model. And people there now want to protect their birds and their forests because tourists are coming. So this is the kind of work that we're doing. I already talked about this before I got to the slide. I got so excited. One of the big things that we do there is a Black Belt Birding Festival. It is this year it's going to be on July 31st through August 2nd. And you're like, dear God, why would you do anything outside at this time? We do it at this time because that's when the most number of birds are on the landscape. That's when you have the most painted buntings and dick thistles and things like that. And because at the Joe Farm, owned by Cornelius Joe and his family, they harvest the hay, and the swallowtail kites and the Mississippi kites come down and pick off insects right in front of us. We call it the kite show, and it has worked, knock on wood, it's worked 5 years in a row. Hopefully it keeps working. How many of you are members of or know about the ABA, the American Birding Association? Okay, about a dozen of you. How many of you listen to the podcast by Nate Swick? Okay, about half a dozen of you. You guys, the rest of you are missing out. If you want to keep up with the latest in the birding world and hear from scientists as well as people that are promoting birding and that sort of thing, listen to the ABA podcast. Nate Swick does a fabulous job. He's going to be our keynote speaker at the Black Belt Birding Festival. And he's going to do a podcast all about our Black Belt birding initiative and the festival this summer. So look forward to that. That gives you plenty of time for you guys to find this podcast and start enjoying it. This is how I learn about what's happening in the birding world and in the bird conservation world, because on my long drives all over the state, I'm listening to these podcasts. So you guys will enjoy this. Okay, let's talk about coastal birds. This will feel close to home. We got a lot of coastal birds that are struggling. These are birds, as I like to put it, to more general audiences, that are trapped between the rising tides and the condos. That little strip of land is what they call home, and it's getting narrower by the year. And there's more and more people in that environment by the year. You guys have, compared to us, a really strong population of snowy plovers. I don't know if Michael Sabatine is here tonight. Shout out to him for finding that snow bunting. A couple weeks ago, I was down here for another talk, and I got to go see the snow bunting that was out there that he found a few days prior. On that hike, I counted 27 snowy plovers. That's like more than the entire Alabama population. So you guys got it going on over here. Meanwhile, we have actually had a lot of success in helping snowy plovers finally start breeding successfully in Alabama by doing such things as, you know, a picture of this. Where are we? I'm getting ahead of myself. By putting up solar-powered electric fencing around snowy plover nests to keep out predators like foxes and cats and coons and things like that. But it's primarily foxes. And as a consequence, we're hatching more snowy plovers than ever before in the last few decades on the Alabama coast. And it's just been a lot of fun for I'm not doing this work. My science team is doing this work, and they're doing a killer job over there. And I'm so proud of them. So we're finally having some success. The other kinds of work we do is just like the work that Florida Audubon is doing along these beaches, doing a lot of outreach and education, getting out and meeting people on the beaches and saying, hey, you know, you see those birds over there? Here's what they've been doing for the last 6 hours. Maybe give them a little bit of space and keep your dog on a leash, right? So those are it's working. In fact, our crews are actually go out to the beaches every year, and they're starting to meet people that they've talked to before and say, oh, you're the bird lady. Yeah, oh no, this is great. We're cool with the birds, we give them space. In fact, we're telling other people to do the same thing. Right? That's when you know you're having an impact. When people that aren't birders are actually promoting bird conservation. Yeah. So this is the kind of work that Florida Audubon's put up here in the Panhandle, and we're doing as well. And then the third program that I'm going to highlight is Project Safe Flight. I told you earlier that window collisions are one of the leading causes of bird mortality in the U.S. and Canada. I've got literature up here on how you can reduce window impacts of birds, reduce collisions. As we talked about, like 2,400 birds per minute. It's a combination of a couple things. First of all, it's directly caused by windows acting like mirrors during the day. The other thing that's happening is that all the light pollution that goes up into the sky at night disrupts bird migration. Birds are just like moths are attracted to lights on their porch at night. Birds get attracted to the lighting of urban areas. They get disoriented, they get confused, and they wind up settling in the urban area during the next morning. And then they're like freaked out with all the stuff that we humans are doing on our daily routines, and then they get freaked out and they fly into windows. Okay, so reducing light pollution at night is also a way of reducing window collisions. And so those of us that are promoting the Dark Sky initiative, some of you maybe heard about, where we're trying to reduce light pollution into the sky. I mean, the sky doesn't need that light. We should just keep that light down here right now. It's just wasted energy, wasted light going up into the sky. Keep it down on the ground, good for birds, helps us see the Milky Way here. All right, so we're doing work in communities across the state. We have volunteers that go out and monitor buildings every spring and fall migration, report back on what they find, and then we work with building owners that have particularly troubling windows to do mitigation, to reduce the collisions on those windows. And like I said, things have to be put on the outside of the windows, as you see one of our former employees doing here on our office windows. We had a huge success with a brand spanking new building on the UAB campus, University of Alabama at Birmingham, UAB. This is their new genomics building. It's all acid etched glass. You're scanning the building, you look out, you can see just like any other window, right? But birds can see that window from the get-go. You don't have to go put some decals on the window or anything like that. And the cost is less than a fraction of a percent to do this on a building of that scale. So we have the science and technology for how to reduce window collisions. It's a matter of getting people to know that these are things that can be done. And so that's part of our mission. Okay. We're also doing a lot of banding programs, and you can come to our banding stations. Many of you probably have before. We've got a whole list of them here. We're putting up Modus towers as well. So yay, glad you guys are doing that as well. We need to make sure our Modus towers are not too close to each other. I'll just put that out there. We need to talk because we're going to be putting one up at Gold State Park, I believe. But yeah, we should talk more about that. We do a lot of outreach and education, as you might imagine, that helps recruit people to birding and to conservation as well. We do field trips, we do workshops, we do courses, guest speakers, we do domestic and international travel. And this year we are now, and there's Brian Camerano, right? Yeah, he's one of your members, I'm sure, or he's probably here a lot. We are now the host of the Alabama Coastal Bird Fest, which has been going on for over 20 years. And we moved it from fall to spring to get out of the path of hurricanes. And we're giving it this April for the first time. And we've got expert guides, Brian Camerano, Brendan, Jerry, where are you? There are two of our guides. They're going to be guiding a trip up in Blackwater State Forest. We have 45 events, top guides, boat trips, birdwalk socials. Anybody know who Bonner Black is? All right, I got like a few nods. She's a singer-songwriter from Nashville who got turned on to birds like roughly in the COVID years. And she is a hell of a comedian as well. And she does skits on Instagram all the time. They can be a little bit racy. So, don't watch them when other people are watching you. Or don't watch it at all. But anyway, it's a lot of fun. She is hilarious. She's going to be our keynote speaker. We're really excited about that. Tickets are on sale now. Buy your tickets because we've already sold out about a quarter of the events. And we haven't even really done a lot of marketing yet. So we'd love to have you guys. It's not far. Come on over to Alabama. The birding's great. All right. So anyway, you guys have been very patient with a long talk. Thank you all very much. And I'll take questions until the hook comes out and drags me off the stage. Thank you.